Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Nasheen Arfani. I am the US Wits representative, and I welcome you to our first Indaba of the year. The year has flown by, and we are really looking forward to hearing from two of our esteemed board members. Our board members are such a wide range of amazing experts, and it's wonderful to be able to ask for their time and their thoughts on important subjects. So I wanted to especially welcome everybody here, and all our board members who are also here. They give a lot of time and expertise, and we're very grateful. And today is going to be a really enlivening discussion. I think it's something that's been on all our minds, what with the advent of all this AI, and what really is the purpose of university. What is our degree good for? And so I think it is going to be really interesting. As I said, at the moment, I am the US representative for Wits University. But before that, before coming to Wits, I have lived and worked on 3 different continents. I've worked for the International Red Cross. So, from giving assistance to far-flung, flood victims in Namibia, or victims of xenophobic violence, refugee camps. I've been kind of fortunate to be able to serve in a lot of different humanitarian and needs. So after that, I was at the Justice Project. This was my first job at Wits, and we worked on a whole range of things to do with the criminal justice system in South Africa, TB transmission in prisons, torture, wrongful convictions. And I'm going into this into a bit of detail because from my perspective of having worked on all of these things, for so long, and the reason that I'm still on this job is because I really think that the best and only solution to all these kind of societal problems is how we transform each individual to become the best of their and to meet their fullest potential as human beings. And so that's why my work for Wits University brings me so much joy, and it gives me so much hope. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion that we're going to have today, and to discuss, what is the power and the potential of universities. So I'm going to hand you over to one of those esteemed board members. It's Indra Naika, who's our moderator, and then he will do the formal introductions and help moderate the discussions as we go forward.
Thanks, Nasheen. I'm assuming you can hear me.
Yes.
Just checking the voice. So thanks, Nasheen, and good evening to all those Witsies out there. Thanks for taking the time tonight and spending the time to get together. Now, just to give you a little bit of background to our discussion, South Africa is one of the world's younger democracies, and it's had its fair share of growing pains. And while many of these challenges came out of our history in addressing the inequalities that were caused by the system of apartheid, we've seen emerging challenges that threaten to wipe out the progress we've made and destabilize almost every aspect of South African society. See, over the past few years, the culture of corruption, increased xenophobic attacks, the destruction of state agencies, unprincipled international policy all add weight to already very difficult problems we've been trying to solve. So I'm sure many of you on this call might have traveled sometime recently to South Africa to visit friends and family. And you might have seen examples of some of these issues, such as load shedding, which affects almost everyone. Now, as always, most problems are complex and have many responsible parties, with government playing a big role. But today we specifically want to talk about Wits University and its role in South African society. Universities all over the world have always been viewed as the beacon of free speech and innovation, where students have the ability to explore new ideas and challenge ones they hold already. Now, for all of us on the call, I'm sure we regard Wits as the premier institution of higher learning in South Africa. So today I'm joined by, no, I should say eclipsed by two outstanding, distinguished professionals and academics. Dr. Hazel Sive is Dean of the College of Science and Professor of Biology at Northeastern University in Boston. She's a research pioneer, award-winning educator and innovator in the higher education space. Prior to June 2020, she was Professor of Biology at MIT, member of the Whitehead Institute for Biomedical Research, and associate member of the Board Institute. She's obviously a fellow native South African, and she received a B.Sc in chemistry and zoology from Wits and a PhD from the Rockefeller University in New York. Dr. Teboho Moja is a professor of higher education at NYU and has been a policy analyst with a focus on the South African higher education system. The late Nelson Mandela appointed her executive director and commissioner to the National Commission on Higher Education, and she has served as special advisor to two ministers of education in South Africa. In addition, Teboho was a board member of the International Institute of Education Planning in Paris and a founding member of the president of the Union of Democratic University Staff Associations. So I'm sure you'll all agree with me that we have two very esteemed colleagues to be sharing our thoughts with. So to get us started, the format for tonight's discussion is, it's informal. We'll be doing Q&A from all the participants, but just to get us started, we thought we'd start off with some introductory remarks, first from Hazel and then from Teboho, on their thoughts on the role of universities in developing or unsettling societies. Once we get those introductory remarks, please raise your hand in the chat and we'll start cycling through the questions that you have and your thoughts and comments so we can facilitate the discussion. Hazel, could we start with you on your thoughts, introductory comments?
Totally. Thank you so much, Indra, and thank you, Nushin, Teboho. What an honor it is to see you and to be your partner today in this conversation. And hello to everyone. It's wonderful to see you all, and especially my lovely cousin, Jane Danziger there. So that is wonderful. You should know that I love universities. I just love that there are places where knowledge is uncovered and stored and taught and used for innovation. I think this is humankind's greatest invention, in my view. In my own field of science, I say that every medicine, every energy source, every insight into climate change and the environment and the cosmos all comes from the work at universities. It is really fantastic. My career has been totally, almost entirely immersed in higher education and universities. And I've had the great honor of studying at, working at, visiting many fine universities, 100 or more across the world. But I will tell you honestly, without any embellishment due to this particular occasion, Wits stands out as the university that has been most valuable in my career, and that remains closest to my heart. In my many travels, entering a university is like coming home, regardless of whether it's in South Africa, Chile, or China, whether I speak the language or know the country. There's always this enthusiastic bustle of students determined to use their education as a stepping stone to a good career. There are the thoughtful, caring professors trying to get students to think independently, to be empowered with knowledge. And often there are researchers trying to develop important, useful research directions. And in my journey, I've come to speak of the wonder of universities and the power of universities. And it's that power that I think is really relevant for our conversation today. For me, the power of the university is that it lies outside the landscape of the government and the politics of a country. Over and over, you can count them on many hands, in repressive regimes or where there is a society that is unsettled in disarray, where problems abound, the universities of the country remain a kind of haven, an enclave of logic, where goals and outcomes are developed that can help improve the society. Part of that power is the power of higher education. We talk a lot about whether or not it's worth going to university, whether or not it's worth getting a degree. But over and over again, higher education is proven to contribute future leaders of a country, to build careers and the socioeconomic growth of a student, their family, their community. The education that Wits has always given has done that and continues even more today. Another part of this power of universities that I like to think about is the ability of members of the university to hold more balanced opinions, countering those of a government in a kind of different space, to offer a place for open discussion and freedom of opinion, and sometimes catalyzing change in the country. And yet another part of the power is that universities are a kind of landing pad for international visitors who can bring their own views and who can serve as a launching pad for collaborations across the world. And again, to put the university into a different place than the government of a country. As a member of a university from a developing or unsettled country, faculty are really welcomed into sister universities across the world. And I see that over and over again. And it is a fantastic part of what universities are. I think unequivocally, Wits is part of the power of universities. Through apartheid, it stood for equality and freedom. And today, amidst a still developing country that is wonderful, but beset by issues, Wits remains a world-class African university. I am truly, honestly proud to call Wits my alma mater. When I was a student at Wits, it was easy for me to get in because I was white. Today, the competition to get a place at Wits is enormous. The top students from South Africa, across the country, and from other African countries vie for the opportunity. I will tell you an incident that has made me understand that the quality of students admitted to Wits today is higher than it was in my day, and that the seriousness with which Wits students take their education is outstanding. They are often the first in their families to attend university, and the hope of the family is pinned on the graduate. Last December, I was awarded an honorary doctorate by Wits. And I would say, as a note, one of the reasons for that was because I had remained in contact with Wits as putting together programs over many years while I was in the United States. And my partner in this was Professor Barry Dwalatsky. And my heart is sad today because Barry passed from us very recently. And I want to acknowledge what a wonderful partner, friend, colleague Barry was in bringing together Wits with the partnerships that I was able to help broker. And Barry was instrumental in promoting my honorary doctorate award, and I'm deeply grateful to him for that, amongst everything else. It was an enormous honor, deeply appreciated. Perhaps the best part of the honor was attending the engineering and built environment graduation, which was so different from my day. On the one hand, it was really similar. The Great Hall was still there, all the buildings are still at Wits. They are historic buildings, they're there. It looks very similar to how it looked when I was a student there. But you know, at the graduation, Nkosi Sikeleli was sung as the national anthem, not as a song of protest. The Wits choir sung in Zulu. And I would say more than 90% of the graduates in engineering and the built environment were Black from across the continent. What pride each of those graduates had, what pride each of their families had, what an impressive bunch of students. I thought it was the best of Wits. Post-apartheid, maybe anywhere. I cannot tell you how emotional that graduation was for me. You know, my heart is still full of admiration for the education Wits provides at very low, debilitatingly low cost, and for Wits embracing the future of South Africa. Wits has this kind of power that places it somewhere different than all of the things that we worry about in South Africa and the government and the issues and so on. Wits truly holds this kind of power of universities that I think is just enormously important and continues to be enormously important for the future of South Africa, of the continent of Africa, and for the world. So thank you. That's my opening statement.
Thanks so much, Hazel. Teboho, you have the floor.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and thanks, Hazel, for those introductory comments that I would say I agree with. And you have really covered an interesting sort of scope of what Wits is about and what Wits stands for and what Wits does for us as individuals, as well as for society as a whole. So in talking about Wits, for me, the first thing that comes to my mind when I hear Wits, I think of the opportunities that it created in giving access to students, particularly Black students, when Wits could stand up against government and opt to admit Black students when the system was still so segregated. Even though they didn't have the power to let you study there, at least they could make a statement by admitting you. And I'm one of those people. I applied to Wits. I wanted to study at Wits. As a Black student in the 80s, I could only study at Wits if I could follow a program that was not offered in any of the other Black universities. And because of that, I don't know whether it was deliberate that Wits had come up with programs that could be slightly different from other programs. It was still a degree in education. It was a master's in education. But at that point in time, they had reconfigured the program to include courses that were methods courses. And no other university that I was aware of offered courses in methodology or so. So that in itself gave me space to actually sort of make a case to say that I want to study at a university where I will also take courses and learn more about the methods before embarking on my research. And that opened doors. My entry wasn't easy. And maybe some of you have seen the story I wrote on one of our newsletters when we're introducing ourselves. It wasn't easy, but once I stepped onto the grounds of Wits, once I became a Witsie, and once I started studying with the other students there, Wits for me became a river that carried me away, and it continues to carry me away without me forgetting where I came from, hence my continued involvement with Wits. I feel I'm in the US to some extent, partly because of my exposure while I was at Wits, an exposure that I wouldn't get anywhere else. For what Wits is, it opened doors for letting international scholars come to study at Wits, intermingle with the students. I was a student then when I met some visiting professors there that opened up my eyes to the world, and even just letting me know that there are opportunities to study elsewhere, that I could leave South Africa. I wouldn't just leave the Black university, but I can leave the white university too and go study somewhere internationally. So it was with that kind of exposure there. That's on one side, access. Going back to Wits now, I'm always sort of amazed at the increased access for Black students. I used to walk that campus and never see Black faces. And now I walk the campus and see so many. Wits has become a microcosm of our own society. It reflects, the question was whether universities change us or we change the university. I think the university in this case, Wits, reflects what goes on in society in general, whether it's issues that are being raised there, that the same issues that are being raised in society in general, the debates that happen there are the debates that we hear in society in general also. So there is space for people to mix and mingle in safe space. I call it safe space because it's a space that that's created for critical thinking, for debate, with respect to each other's views in the classrooms, outside the classrooms, the activities that take place, the extramural activities that students participate in. I've seen when we're celebrating the centenary, some of the albums, the photos, just seeing how students are mixing with one another, whether in protest or in happiness, in celebration, or in any sort of space that they were in, the students are there. And for me, that's what shapes and tells society that we can live side by side with one another. And it is that space at the university that offers that. Wits for me offers quality education. It's quality education, and I talk about education more in a broader way. It's not just the teaching or so, but the quality of graduates that come out of there, wholesome training of people that are coming out. When you look at our society, look at the leadership that the university has produced, it can only happen in a space that's created to actually consciously help in the development of the future leaders and the future of the country. So I teach in a program here at NYU where we focus on the lives of students while they're at university or so, looking at student development theories and all. And when I look at what goes on in universities like Wits and realize that the students are coming there just as they finish high school, young adults, maturing into adulthood. And it is so important that the space that they operate in is a space that's going to nurture them to be good members of society. They are in that critical formative stage, and their minds are still such that they're malleable, persuaded, but in a more critical way, in a more sort of embracing environment, that they feel safe in that space, they feel they're included, they feel they're part of it. And it is because of that that I have also seen lots of my family members also choosing Wits as the place to study. I've had my brothers, I've had sisters-in-law, I've had other family members that have studied at Wits too. They chose Wits of all the other institutions. But the highlight of my life too was when my own son graduated at Wits. And when we went into Senate Hall, it was called Senate Hall then, and I was sitting in there. Same class that my son was graduating from was the daughter of one of my classmates that were doing our masters at the same time. A white woman with her daughter, a Black woman with my son, Black son. So just being in that space that, and the next generation has been able to also share the same space, the same platform, land, they were doing the same degree and all that. So for me, that was a real highlight also. I've seen Wits overall as a space to escape some of the things that are happening in society. We know that some students have actually the university as their home and as a safe home. When we had the pandemic and students had to go back home, some of them really dreaded those long, long periods of time away from the university where they had to be at home because the conditions were not conducive and they had to stay in with the family, study from there or so. So by just having that space to be at the university, to be yourself, to be independent from family, to be able to study with other people who think like you or who think differently, but are ready to listen to you, for me, is one of the invaluable experiences of being there. I'll touch on other points quickly and then open and let other people also contribute. Looking at just research alone, when you look at the stats, the amount of research that's been produced from Wits that addresses some of the critical societal challenges. I remember even in the days that I was studying at Wits, when we had the law clinic and all that was addressing societal challenges, people coming there, knowing that there are those kind of services, research being done on different issues. I remember some of the centers that were started at Wits while I was there, and some that continued even before that to address what we see now as part of the Sustainable Development Goals, issues such as poverty, inequity, health, sustainability. The university has been there addressing those for a long time and continues to do that. We see the universities trying, and in particular Wits, trying to make sure that South Africa is being placed in the right space in making progress in addressing those sustainable development goals also. And they're doing that by conducting really groundbreaking research and generating information that can inform policies, not just for the country, but for the continent as well as for the world also. We're seeing research that contributes to improving what goes on in industry and also driving a lot of the innovations that are happening. Bottom line, social impact, what the university is doing to actually contribute or impact society also. And I see Wits being closely connected with the society. Just its location in Braamfontein and the impact it has on Braamfontein as an area there, the development, the businesses that have been run there that are successful because of the presence of the university there, how the university engages local communities, not just in the urban areas, but also in the rural areas, how Wits promotes social justice issues and so on. So you always see a Wits is somewhere, you come across people everywhere in the country. You're likely in any meeting that you're in to meet a Wits or so. Now being in the US, here we are, we're coming together, we're meeting one another and continuing the Wits legacy. Let me stop there and give others a chance. So thank you for listening.
Thanks, Teboho. So we have an open floor. If you have a question, you can raise your hand and we'll call you out in order. We have some questions that we pre-made as well. So please, feel free to raise your hand and we can get through some of your questions and discussion. So maybe while we're waiting for some of these questions to come in, Teboho, you mentioned one of the more implicit ways of trying to get the way the university contributes to changing South African society through research. I remember the days when we were at Wits and, we had one primary goal and we always were demonstrating against the end of apartheid, and that involved, demonstrating walking down Jordan Street or getting arrested, running away from the police, but just, that mere presence of a Wits student being on the news at night and bring out that awareness of the injustice in society. Today's problems that we have are some of them are very complex and structural. Let's just take the one that we all always talking about, which is like the load shedding with Eskom. In addition to the research that Wits does into sustainable energy resources, do you think that the university should play a more active role in addressing these issues with the government and with those agencies, or do you see this more as a passive role where it's about research and students understanding the impacts of some of this on society?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Indra. That's $1 million question. That's a question that always ends up with a kind of stalemate, because government wants to see more of applied research coming out of the universities, and the universities sees themselves as producing both applied and basic research, that both of them might contribute to impacting society in different ways at different times, or never even impacting society, but it allows people to, conducting basic research allows people to sort of like explore and go to territories that are not explored or so. So I know that one of the challenges we have is how research is funded in South Africa or in many places also, that the purse is a little bit tight from government side. So government wants to fund research that they can only see immediate impact on. If a politician gives you money, says, where am I getting for my money? If you say, I'm just publishing papers and all, and talking to other scholars that are not pleased with that. So with that, what I'm trying to say is that universities shouldn't compromise themselves and be instruments of government and just serve government or so. That therefore a broader mission to serve society in different ways, and society is made up of a whole sort of potpourri of different pieces and all that needs to be served. So we cannot define the research that comes out of universities in a narrow way just to inform policy. It is important to do that, but we should have space. And if we have other means to support that kind of activity from the university, that's where we come in also as Witsies and all, and saying, okay, I believe in this part of the work being done, even if government doesn't see immediate relevancy of it, but I understand it, I understand why it's been done, and I'm willing to beat the drum for it and advocate for that kind of work to be supported and be done.
Thanks, Teboho. Hazel, do you have anything to add on how universities can be more instrumental against these current issues, actively or passively?
Can I jump in to say that Riva had the hand up? I don't know if you saw it. before.
No, thanks for pointing that out, Teboho.
Mhm.
I say, maybe a sentence. I think Teboho is exactly right. I think research at university is very complex. And I think it's complex, it's different at universities in different parts of the world. It's different at different universities in the United States. There's some universities, I call them the luxury universities. I used to be at one, MIT, Harvard, Stanford. They really are sort of luxury universities. I think, NYU, Northeastern is kind of a luxury, it's that sphere of universities where actually the research can be really interesting. And that's all that matters. It's really interesting. And then there's the push to get really interesting, to translate, to turn into applied, and to address societal issues. And that is very hard. Sometimes in science, it takes decades. mRNA vaccines, believe me, mRNA vaccines were not created by Moderna. They were created from decades and decades of basic research, and no one knew anything except it was really interesting. And all of over the years, it kind of comes together and culminates in mRNA vaccines, but they were never, that was not the point. That was the outcome decades later. And so it's extremely difficult to actually point research in the direction of solving societal problems. I think most universities try to do that in various ways. The one I'm at now, certainly we are trying to address great problems in society. But actually, what often happens is that you go somewhere really interesting, and eventually it turns into something applied. I would say for universities that are in more developing countries, there is a greater push to go into, as Teboho says, to go into the direction of solving problems of the community, of society. And I think a lot of the Wits research actually really goes there. The medical research is looking very hard to see at cancer treatment outcomes and genomics related to the mutations associated with cancer in African patients as opposed to patients elsewhere in the world and so on. So I think there's a real, there's a brilliance. The investigators at Wits are brilliant, and they fully understand the notion of trying to make an impact. I think trying to influence government policy, that is a different discussion, actually. We could have a lovely discussion there. Hey, Teboho, I think that's not what we're talking about exactly.
Thanks. Riva, you had a question or thought?
So thank you. So I'm quite intrigued at the conversation about what the elite universities do and how research is conducted and the difference that Teboho draws between applied and basic research. I think that where Wits is in the middle of this kind of set of enormous challenges is the reason that we have such creative thinking coming out of Wits, such unique thinking coming out of Wits. I mean, I also went to fancy universities once I'd finished at Wits. But Wits has continued, and frankly, South African universities have continued to push the envelope on some really crucial issues relating to the things I wanted to ask about. I want to ask if you have any information, any stories, narratives, case studies about how Wits is dealing with demonstrating what the university's role is in relation to things like the SDGs, things like social impact, things like just transitions. I wondered if you just had any. As I'm out of the loop on this, I would just love to hear that.
Hazel, do you want to go first?
I'm happy to. Riva, I want you to explain a little bit more, though, to us. What are you particularly asking? I hear you talking about Wits positioned in a kind of a unique way, and it is. And I will say, I think Wits is very unique because it is either number one or number two of the top African universities. It oscillates between UCT and Wits.
Yeah, no, I know that.
That is really an important place for Wits to maintain. say again what the specific thought.
Right. Well,
you
let me
gave.
tell you what's behind my question. So I've retired now from a career in corporate sustainability, and I was like, doing fabulous work in corporate sustainability from a northern perspective. What was interesting to me is every time I kind of poked around in what was going on in South Africa, my eyes were widened. The paradigm was different. The point is that the context is different, and because the context is different, it means different problems and challenges are being engaged with, and they're actually meant that in that field, South Africa and South Africans were ahead of where we were in our kind of hubris in the north. And so my question is that now we're in these global challenges. And so I'm throwing out some acronyms. This is the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm throwing out social impact. I'm throwing out just transitions, which is to do with the transition means the transition in climate change, and justice, how do we create a transition to climate change that is fair and equitable, and particularly with a labor focus. In other words, if you go to renewable energy, what happens to workers in coal? So that's a particular issue obviously in South Africa. But what I'm interested in is do you know anything about these themes and what is being done at Wits in these themes? Because I'd find that just fascinating.
I think Nushin is going to respond there, because I was going to respond to you, Riva, and say I think that's an absolutely fantastic question, and we should invite someone to an Indaba who can actually speak to us really far more knowledgeably than I could, certainly.
So the vice chancellor's office, he has a set of the 3 or 4 different deputy vice chancellors. He also has just appointed a pro VC for sustainability and climate change. So this is Professor Imran Velodia. He is really charged with taking a real overarching look at what the university is doing in terms of all of these issues that you've outlined, Riva, at a very, very senior level, and advising the university structures, advising the vice chancellor and the Senate, but also looking at ways in which across all the different faculties and all the different centers and so on, we're looking at how do we contribute towards the SDGs, how do we contribute towards lowering inequality, and definitely how do we make ourselves adaptable to climate change. And before Imran was the pro vice chancellor, he was head of the Southern Center for Inequality Studies, SCIS. It has received a lot of support from huge organizations like Ford Foundation, the Gates Foundation, and interestingly, they call it the Southern Center because of this idea of the context of how that kind of South African global South knowledge creation, and because it is all about context. And they're doing unbelievably amazing work and have been doing for about 5-6 years now around inequality and addressing it, and very kind of innovative ways of doing that.
Thanks, Nushin. Riva, thank you, and for the question, and you've given us some thought. Maybe then you can help us put the next Indaba together around sustainability. David, fine. I think you had a question, or you had some thoughts to share. If you're talking, you might be on mute, David.
No, I wasn't planning to. I just was trying to get my computer to function properly. But I do want to echo Hazel's comments. I was recently at Wits at a graduation ceremony. I graduated in 1972, and the only condition really of getting into the university was to have a white skin. And being at a recent graduation ceremony, literally 90% of the students were non-white, of all different races, and more than half were women. And it was just such a shock to me to see that and to realize, 2 generations of South Africans were lost for a higher education. A Black woman, when I went to university, the only possible job she had was as a servant somewhere. And now it's the world has opened up. And I was startled by that. I asked Barry Dowaletsky a question, did these people have jobs? And his comment to me was probably 90% of them already have jobs. And I found that again fabulous. What a change in South Africa. it was the most important aspect of me being there, was to see that change.
Thanks, David. Thanks. Appreciate that. Please, if I missed your hand up, Peter, you have your hand up.
I've heard sustainability and climate change mentioned a couple of times, and I'd like to ask, to what extent is Wits setting a good example of sustainability by doing things with its own facilities?
Nushin, maybe you'd like to take that. Do we have any data on Wits?
I did see just recently, like in the last week, a campaign on campus about being sustainable, and they have a whole campaign going, and kind of posts and places, and so that every staff member and students are kind of involved in sustainable actions throughout the day, whatever that would mean in terms of energy use or plastic use and so on. Let me look for it while you guys carry on, and I can put the link into the chat box.
Yeah.
I
I just add something. I was in South Africa last week, and I'm aware that there's a Sustainable Development of South Africa network, and Wits is part of that. So there's close monitoring of what goes on in the universities, the projects that universities are doing to actually become much more sustainable, linking with one another, partnering with other universities or so, as well as just focusing on the sustainability issues in a broad way. So government expects institutions to report back. So they are documenting that, they are keeping a tab on that. And there's voluntary participation in the Sustainable Development Network that universities have enrolled in, and I know Wits is a member of that.
It's interesting. I would say there is the reality of South Africa and the electricity situation. And, Wits produces a bunch of its own power on a generator when it has to, which is not a great sustainable direction. So it's a complicated landscape, but Wits has always had a very deep commitment to the environment, the contributions to the sustainability of the flora and fauna of South Africa and of other countries in Africa, and the practices. I think, from when I was a student through today, I think we can be very proud of the work that Wits researchers have done in terms of wildlife management, in terms of preservation of habitats, and so on. And I think, that has never abated, and it's something that I think Wits should be very proud of.
Thanks, Hazel. Helen, I see you've got your hand up. Are you still on mute, Helen?
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for two very interesting updates on research at Wits. We haven't really talked about teaching. I'm a graduate of the 1967 medical school class, and one of the hallmarks of the experience was an outstanding array of teachers that we have. I'd just like to hear an update on teaching at Wits from either or both of you. Thanks.
Thanks, Helen.
Yeah, I think what I can comment on is one of the impressive things with Wits when it came to teaching was how forward-looking they were before the pandemic, based on and informed by the big mass protest for fees must fall, that the university was stimulated to think of other modes of teaching as a way of respecting the fact that some students might want to boycott classes and protest while others need to be in classes and so on. And they had developed a whole system of online teaching way, way ahead of everybody else. And when we're hit by the pandemic, Wits was one of the handful of universities, I think there were just 5 or so that were ready to just embark on online teaching, and still continued with quality teaching that was happening through online or hybrid form. When government sort of closed the universities and shifted the calendar, many universities were unable to keep up with even the adjusted calendar, except places like Wits that were already ready for this. So for me, I'm impressed with that component of it, the forward thinking, that they were ready for the change. On a day-to-day basis in the classrooms, I think testimony to that comes through various performances, that the students are still graduating, they're graduating with good marks, they're getting jobs, they're seen as getting quality education through teaching and other aspects of educating the students. So I would say that we don't have a situation where Wits graduates are struggling to get jobs. And that in itself is testimony that the quality of training, teaching, and education they're getting is of high quality. With the diverse population that they have, I am almost sure that the teaching faculty is very, very diverse as well. I don't have the figures, but with all what government has also put in place to say that there should be employment equity and all, that Wits complies and makes sure that there's diversity in their faculty, diversity in their teaching staff and researchers.
You know, I think that's terrific, Teboho. I think Wits's education has always been fantastic. And I say again, you know, Wits is either number 1 or number 2 of universities in Africa. It is rated globally. It's got a respectable global rating. It's really an outstanding university. The Dean of Science, Nitya Chetty, has brought in a new kind of training that includes innovation training in being facile in entrepreneurship and innovation into the master's, and interested in doing it into the PhD space across the faculties of science. And that is, you know, that is very innovative across anywhere. So I think Wits is not a university where it is in stasis in terms of thinking through how to teach and how to teach innovatively. I will say, just to, you know, to conclude this this question, that Zeblon Velakatsi took the university forward when he was Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research. Before he became Vice Chancellor, he took Wits forward as the only university on the continent of Africa that was connected connected with MITx and with edX and putting together quality online education for the world. And that is something that was done by Wits in an extremely high quality, important way. And still, Wits is the only African university to be so engaged in that particular online platform. It's very impressive to me.
Thanks, Hazel. We've set aside an hour. Of course, we'll keep the webinar open for longer, but just to be respectful of everyone's time, I thought maybe we'd have some just closing comments from Hazel, and then Teboho on your thoughts on just some closing comments on you've given us a lot of positive things to think about in Wits' role. And we often get challenged with perceptions that there's anti-Semitic behavior or there's these issues, but Wits clearly separates itself from the government. But do you have any closing thoughts on making sure that we keep in touch and how we as alumni can do what we can do to help improve the situation at home and for other Wits students?
Well, I can give a couple of, closing comments and then defer to Teboho there, who has great wisdom. I am very positive. I think, universities are fantastic. I think Wits is fantastic. That is not to say they're not challenges, and it's not to say that we as a group should not address them. And I think absolutely, looking at Nushin there, absolutely. Let us invite to future Indaba's faculty, others who can answer questions about perhaps things that are more troubling. But I would say that is true of every university. Find me, the perfect university, and I will find you a liar. There is always something, to be worried about. Donations that shouldn't have been taken, actions that shouldn't have been made, diversity in the United States universities that does not reflect the demographic of society. There's always something. So I think for Wits, there certainly are things you can finger point and worry, and there are certainly huge challenges in South Africa. But I still will say unequivocally and, absolutely on any platform that Wits stands as a shining example of a top university. And the support that we can give to Wits, even if it is not of a huge magnitude, and certainly amongst this group, there is absolutely some fantastic support, but any magnitude of support that can be given to Wits can really have an impact that far exceeds the impact that it would have in the United States. And I think for me, that's very important to actually feel that the impact that as an alum I can make at Wits is larger than the impact that I can make in the United States. So it is a fantastic conversation and look forward to continuing it with other guests. And Teboho, what an honor to be your partner tonight.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Hazel. It has been an honor for me too, sharing this platform, and everybody else who's here who has participated in this discussion. And my parting shot would be more on how proud I am with the leadership caliber we have at Wits. When you look at what's going on in South Africa, we're very, very challenged when it comes to leadership in our universities. It was UCT the other day, today it's UNISA, it's all leadership related matters. It's not easy to lead those institutions in South Africa. I know I'm one of those that opted not to take those roles, because they are really challenging. So I would urge the alumni, the diaspora, wherever we are, to really make the leadership feel appreciated for the work they're doing, and in supporting them, be ready when we're called upon to help so that we can really prop up the university and get the university going. So there are people who are spending sleepless nights. You saw even in the past with the Fees Must Fall, how a vice chancellor never slept and being surrounded by students. Nobody wants those jobs. So if we have got good leaders that have agreed to do that, then I'm calling for that support as much as possible. And support comes in different forms. It can be resources, financial resources, or just being there for them to say that we're there, we're with you, we support the good work you're doing. So thank you.
Thanks, Teboho. Thanks, Hazel. Thank you so much for all of your great, your words of inspiration and your thoughts. I think the group, talking on behalf of the group, I think it's much appreciated. So I think we'll close out the official proceedings for tonight. But you're welcome to stay back if you have any other thoughts or questions. Thank you.